we talk about it week in, week out, actually, it's just this Labour has a messaging problem, and Nowhere Man 2710, to be precise, he asks, does Labour have a charisma problem? Is that causing them difficulties?
That's a good question. I think there are certainly some people in government and in the Parliamentary Labour Party who do fear that they lack sort of persuasive communicators, and there are some politicians who are more at ease with the new media age of YouTube, social media than others. You look at how Donald Trump is very at ease with the age of podcasts and video, and Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have a much more traditional communication style. Now, I think the counter from government would be ultimately governments tend to get judged by results. Why did Joe Biden lose why did the Democrats lose the US election? It wasn't just Trump going on Joe Rogan. It's because voters had been hit by inflation. They were unhappy with illegal immigration, and they were unhappy with the chaos, the farce around Biden's departure. They think ultimately if you deliver for voters, and it's been quite a while since we've had a government in this country which sets clear aims and isn't marred in infighting or strange sort of ideological projects, then they will give you their vote. They'll repay that faith. But there is a shortage of I think high profile persuasive communicators. Yes,
I mean it links in with a theme of the week that we've spotted in your questions, and it's about how the media report on politics too. So David Banks asks us, with all the recent frothing about Rachel Reeves and whether she should go, is it fair to say that media outlets addicted to the febrility they're used to from the twilight of the Tory years are finding it hard to adjust? Rachel, are you addicted to febrile governments?
Absolutely. No, I think the answer to this is yes. And I think that the Tory psychodrama, as we called it, it was just briefings from one end of government to the other end of government, factions within the Conservative Party, and because of various sort of quite specific parliamentary quirks, the lack of a majority government and the way the Conservative Party works, it really could be that one bad poll could be the thing that meant you had another leader, which meant you had another prime minister, which is really exciting. And as we have discussed before, when Labour have a 160 odd majority, bad polls are bad for Labour. They are useful for analysing how the country is feeling. They're useful for framing the challenges that the government has of keeping this fractured voter coalition together. But they don't tell you anything about when we're going to have another election or when we're going to have another prime minister. And I think there is a bit of adjusting going on in the lobby. I don't know. You've been in the lobby longer than I have.
Yeah, I mean, someone in number 10 recently called them chaos junkies, and I think there is an adjustment going on, which is that people aren't used to a government with a majority this big and this stable. The last time a prime minister had a majority anything like this big was Tony Blair in his second term. And, every government since the Blair-Brown era has had the potential to fall. Even the coalition between the Tories and Lib Dems, people didn't necessarily think it would last a full term initially and so on. So there is an adjustment. I think on Reeves, it's an interesting episode to reflect on. I think, clearly it reached an absurd degree of speculation.
This is on whether she should go or not, or whether
as
she was
I wrote
going
at the
to
time, Starmer and Reeves are the closest sort of PM Chancellor partnership since Osborne and Cameron. There was no sense in which a change of Chancellor would mean a change of direction. So it obviously reached disproportionate levels. But there is genuine unhappiness with some of Rachel Reeves' policies, not just in the PLP, but in the cabinet, particularly winter fuel, and I think a sense that then the messaging had been too negative. And it's right that journalists reflect them. We're having conversations, obviously, that others aren't, and so this is not some Westminster confection. That the Reeves speculation was built on a reality, which is that she's not her personal ratings are not good, and there is unhappiness in the Labour ranks too.
Pretty punchy question next from John in Edinburgh. Do the media just hate the Lib Dems? Now, I just want to explain a little more about what he says. So he says, in the last Parliament, the media treated the SNP as the third party based on their seat count, despite the Lib Dems getting twice their vote share. In this Parliament, the media are treating Reform as the third party, despite the Lib Dems having more than 10 times their number of parliamentary seats. Well, let's split this, right? George, you take this one. Is it fair to say that the SNP were treated better by the media?
No, I don't think it's fair to say the SNP were better treated. I mean, if anything, they received more condemnation because Scottish independence is a cause most of the media oppose. It's certainly true to say the SNP probably made for better copy. I mean, you've got big personalities, like Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon, these sort of totemic clashes. Now, you can't write anything about the Lib Dems at the moment where the stakes are as high as that. I mean, they were running Scotland. So I don't think the SNP comparison is the right one. Yes, they were the third party at Westminster, but they were also running the Scottish government.
Now, I feel I need to jump in before going to you, Rachel, because you often cover the Lib Dems, right? And we have been very nice to the Lib Dems on this podcast, I would say. But do you feel that they are doing anything that's worthy of reporting at the moment that's being missed?
So I cover the Lib Dems when I write the weekly PMQs reviews, and I try and always touch on what Ed Davey asks, because I think it's really interesting how the Lib Dems are positioning themselves, how they're using their role as the third largest party. They get 2 questions at PMQs each week, which they didn't get when it was the SNP who were in that role. And how are they positioning themselves? Are they opposing Labour, or are they still fighting the Conservatives? Like, what are their core issues? And that is, I think, the moment each week when the Lib Dems kind of have the biggest platform. And what are they using that for? Well, there are 2 key issues that Ed Davey wants to use the kind of influence of being the third largest party. One is closer ties with the EU. The Lib Dems are kind of the only pro-EU, pro-rejoining at least parts of the EU.
And you put this
party.
in your PMQ write-up this week. He did that.
Party in Parliament, and actually it feeds into the growth thing, because Ed Davey's point was, hey, if you're prioritising growth over everything else, how about rejoining the customs union, or at least this new pan-European customs area thing that is being discussed. The other one, obviously, we talked a lot about, which is health and social care. Ed Davey's own sort of personal reasons for pushing that, but a lot of his questions at PMQs have been about issues where the government moves, like the increase in national insurance, could hit pharmacies, could hit community healthcare centres. He asked about hospitals a lot. And one of the things that I have noticed is that Keir Starmer often looks a lot more unsettled and a lot more awkward when he's answering a very politely worded, could the Prime Minister just confirm that community healthcare centres won't be hit by the government's national insurance increase question, than when he's facing a barrage of, will the Prime Minister admit that he's a terrible person from Kemi Badenoch. So I think Ed Davey's demeanour and his tactic of being a sort of supportive but critical friend of the government actually is undermining Labour, or at least being more effective than Kemi Badenoch is.
I mean, one of the reasons, obviously, people talk, the media are talking about reform so much, just to push back a bit at John, is obviously that they're polling so high. I mean, it's pretty much a 3-way split in the polls at the moment. Yes, there's no election between Reform, the Conservatives, and Labour, but going back to the Lib Dems, George, I mean, obviously during the election campaign, we had all these stunts by Ed Davey. You can't really do that in the House of Commons. He's taking a different approach. But should or could they be doing something else to get more attention?
Yeah, well, I think they have been getting more attention recently. So I wrote a piece taking a detailed look at their election strategy recently. That was to tie in with the speech Ed Davey gave on Europe, saying that the UK should rejoin the customs union, also setting out dividing lines on Donald Trump. So they like to see themselves as the only party that will criticise Trump. They say Labour can't for diplomatic reasons, and the Conservatives and Reform don't want to. In fact, they're competing to suck up to Donald Trump. So that's how they get more attention. It's by setting out distinctive policies. The same with social care, where Ed Davey repeatedly challenges Keir Starmer in the House. We should remember that the Lib Dems didn't receive a huge amount of media coverage before the election, still ended up winning more than 70 seats. So I think they're probably in some ways more relaxed than you might think about not always making the headlines, because for them it's about reaching the voters who matter, and they've got a clear electoral strategy. But yes, look, in general, of course, the media should probably cover the Lib Dems more. But I think we give them a fair hearing here, I'd say.
Also, if you cover the Lib Dems more, you are inevitably going to cover the contradictions inherent in the Lib Dems, because...
Go on, tell us about them.
They're basically run as... They're going to hate me for saying this, but they often run NIMBY campaigns. They run sort of by-elections as, we're the local champions, and we're not going to build that block of flats or whatever, and then they go on and talk about how important it is that we build, houses fairly but not there, and we build infrastructure, but not there. And they don't necessarily have a they would argue with me on this, but the sort of national agenda. There are certain key issues that they're focusing really hard on, which is great for drawing attention to those issues and reminding the Labour government that it's not just reform and the Conservatives they have to worry about. But I think if we covered them more, we might...
It might not be favourable.
They might not be too happy with some of that coverage.